I'm in a great admiration to each of you for being here in this freezing cold so early in the morning. Everyone, especially Eddie. And you too. Now, before we go to the subject, just some word that I think is a connection between the parasha and the daf. Vatomer Rivka el Yitzchak, Rebecca said to Isaac, Katzti bechayai is no meaning of my life. And she explained, Mipnei bnot chet, because of the daughter of chet. Im lokeach Yaakov isha mibnot chet, if Jacob is going to marry any one of those daughter of chet, lama li chaim, I don't want to live anymore, Rebecca said. Baal HaTurim, great Torah commentator, he said that it's the word katzti, it's with a small kuf, and he said that that's a midrash, tells us that she prognosticated, she prophesied that it will be a subsequent destruction of the temple in the size of 100 cubit, kufama. And it's something that quotes Tehillim Psalm 84, that when King David planted the architectural engineering of the sanctuary was in a plan of 100 cubit, which again, there is a certain mystical explanation. The rabbis tells us the issue of bnot chet. It's something that repeats itself in the book of Genesis 10 times. What's so bad about them? Why they are so against specific bnot chet? There are several explanations. The general explanation is the idea that it was a 7 order of crisis that came from them. It starts with the story of last week, when Abraham negotiated over the cave of Machpelah, which is the crisis to this very day, the gravesite of our ancestors. The big conflict began at that time that Abraham, our most important forefather, bowed down before them. And again, follow the rabbinic teaching in the 7, which we know in number 7 plays an important role in Judaism. In a 7 subsequent order, Mordechai refused to bow down to Agag. Who is the Agag? Who descendant of Amalek? Who is Amalek? Descendants of Esav. What's the issue? Esav married the daughter of Chet. So the whole idea is the story of Esther built on the premises that Mordechai refused to bow down to the descendants of Chet. You see further when Jacob bowed down to Esav in a manner of trying to have peace, he bowed down 7 times. So he was forced at the end of this parasha out of his parents' house because his mother Rebecca was afraid that maybe someone matched him with the daughter of Chet. And then you see that Jacob bowed down with all of his children to Esau, excluding Benjamin that wasn't born. And Benjamin descendants was King Saul, Ish Yemini, that fought against Agag, and Mordechai the same fought against Haman. You see the whole concept of King Saul that lost the kingdom to David, and as a result Agag, descendant of Amalek, brought Haman. You see that concept. I don't want to go too much to details, but the idea of bnot chet is the idea that Rebecca has the prophetesis, the vision, the idea of foreseeing, not just because of her background, the house she came from, but the seed that all this chet is crisis. You see when King David have a fight with Hanun ben Ammon, the nation of Ammon, This is follow the prohibition that we should not have Ammon and Moab among us, which is again Uriah the Hittite, which is the descendants of Het, and then the big issue of Bathsheba and Uriah. You see the marriage between David and Ma'acha, which was the daughter of Talmud, the king of Geshur. That is a result of that union. You have Absalom and Tamar. And then you see the famous story with the rape of Tamar, the murder of Amnon, the rebellious of Absalom. All this connected very much. You see the marriage of Solomon, the son of Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, with the daughter of Pharaoh, that eventually at the end of his life turned to worship idols, and as a result our nation divided to two parts, and that part of which we believe the lost of the 10 tribes. And you see, I just give you the last vignette, the number 7, which is the king Chizkiyahu, when he met the Babylonian king representatives, Mrudach, Baldan, so Isaiah the prophet told him that it's going to be an exile, Babylonian exile, and destruction of the temple. And the exile of Babylon, it's the result of that was the meeting between Haman, the Agagite, the descendants of Amalek, with Mordechai. The text said, Asher hogla Yerushalayim. He was exiled from Jerusalem. Asher hogla Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, exiled them. So you see, again and again and again, the whole idea of Rebecca saying, I don't want my son anything to do with the daughter of Het, it's a reason for that. So why are we saying it? It's because today we're going to deal indirectly with those issues. We're going to deal with the painful issue if someone living, which unfortunately in this congregation we see some people who even attend our daily prayer, that they living with a non-Jew, and they come to us and they ask that they want to observe somehow Taharat HaMishpacha. He wants her to go to duck herself in a mikveh, even not being Jewish. And the question is that acceptable? Is that it's pave anything to do with their state of purity? Another question we're going to discuss is the result of cohabitation between someone who's idol worshipper and a daughter of Israel, especially if she is a captive, if she's a maid, if she's raped, etc. And in a general term, we're going to discuss today the concept of Tfisat Kiddushin. Tfisat Kiddushin is the legality of betrothing someone. How and when and where you say that even an act which was a violation of Torah law, act of cohabitation or act of betrothing, still has a positive effect, such as a normal matter of act of violation of Leviticus 18, the normal case, the child may be illegitimate. So we are not just speaking about the illicit interaction, we're going to speak also at the consequence order for the next generation and the future generation. So where we are on page 44b on the bottom of the page. אמר רבא בר חנא אמר רבי יוחנן, הכל מודים בעבד ועובד כוחמים הבעל בת ישראל שהוולד ממזר. He holds that all agree. Here we speak about Canaanite. It's one of the 7 nations that was in the land of Israel. It's a Canaanite slave or idolater who cohabited with a Bat Israel, that the result, the baby, the child, is produced, it's a mamzer, it's illegitimate. Mana kol modim, Shimon hatimni. That's what we study, if you remember, yesterday and day before yesterday. Afal gav damar Shimon hatimni en mamzer mechayvei lavin. Even Shimon said that illegitimate child is not part of the negative commandment, that because it's not involved karet. Karet meaning the Torah said that soul shall be cut off. It's not. He hold that relation between a Canaanite slave or idol worshipping person, it's a violation of negative commandment, but it's not part of which we call that soul shall be cut off, the karet. Hanemile, this apply. Page 45, mechayavei lavin. The tafsebehu kiddushin. If you remember, we studied it several times. For example, on page 23, we learn kitiyena leish te nashim, when a person have two wives, that there is a tfisat kiddushin, even someone violated negative commandment, but as far as the acceptance of the kiddushin, unlike Rabbi Akiva, the majority of the sages said, it's also on page 44, that it's accepted. Versus the Mishnah in Kiddushin, page 66, said, when it's come to Chayvei Kritut, it's not tofes, it's not applied. Let me elaborate for one word. There are two concepts. One is something in the Torah said, if you do that, that soul shall be cut off. That's called Chayavei Kritut. There is another concept, the Torah said, don't do that, it's a negative commandment. The majority of the rabbis hold, unlike Rabbi Akiva, who said, when it's come to karet, everyone agree, Rabbi Akiva and all the other rabbis, forget it, the kiddushin, the betrothed, has no legality, it doesn't have an effect. Versus, if someone have relation that it's in a violation of negative commandment, then you see a disputation. Rabbi Akiva said, it's not in effect, the child is illegitimate. The other rabbis said, the majority said, it is by force of circumstance, but yavad, after the fact, legitimate. Aval hacha, oved kochavim ve'eved, but here when it's come to idol worshiper and a slave, Canaanite slave, kevan delo tafse behu kiddushin, because the same as chayavei kritut, so they say chayavei kritut dami. Rashi tells us, Rashi brought a few very fascinating points. I just give you the vignette. Rashi said, "Dichtiv shvu lachem po im hachamor, ama domeh lachamor." When Abraham went to bind his son Isaac, so he said, "Sit here with a donkey." So he said, "This nation," he called them like a donkey meat. Anyway, so he said, furthermore, that these 7 nations, that in particular we are prohibited to get married. There are many reasons, but he ends up by saying, "Ubesheilto de Rav Achai mefik meha vehi beulat Baal." In very short, in this beautiful Rashi, he said that if you have this situation of an idolater who is a slave, it's not entfisat kiddushin. The act of betrothal is illegitimate. And the consequent, the child is not legitimate. They said any one of these type, such as idolater, etc., the act of cohabitation, the result of that, create an illegitimate child. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer, Ein mamzer lami sheisur o isur rava v'anush karet. He says the same as Shimon Atini. He said that it's only when it's a total violation of erva. Erva, for example, is the relation between a person, his sister, his daughter, his mother, etc. Right? Incest. And this type of prohibition, then I agree. So what do you mean by saying the majority agree? Rabbi. That's something we're going to study on page 50. אין הדברים הללו לדברי רבי עקיבא, שהיה עושה חלוצה כערווה. He consider חלוצה the same as ערווה, which means that it's a total, consider arayot, and therefore if someone, for example, Yavam, the surviving brother, did וחליצה to his brother's wife, deceased brother's wife, and then after he released her, he cohabited with her. So basically she doesn't need a get from him because the kiddushin, the act of betrothal, is not legitimate. Rabbi said that that's applied only following Rabbi Akiva, who said that this is have no effect, versus the others that it's the other way. Velei lo svirale. So you meant to say that, for example, if you have a person that have two women for ייבום, and so he did וחליצה for one, so he doesn't, according to Rabbi Akiva, he doesn't need to give the gets to the second one. So basically וחליצה is like erva. You don't need get. According to Rabbi, that he holds the same as Shimon HaTimni, so when you have צרת חלוצה, which is חייבי להבין, so he need to get. בעובד כוכבים ועבד מודה, דחי את הרב דימי, אמר רב יצחק ברב דומי, משום רבינו, עובד כוכבים ועבד הבעד ישראל, הבלד ממזר an idolater, or slave cohabited with בת ישראל, so the child is illegitimate. רבי אחא, שר הבירה, it's like, the Gemarrah in Ketubot 88 said that it's like the mayor. But it can be also in those days a tower or someone who in charge for Jerusalem. Anyway, ורבי תנחום ברי דרבי חייא איש כפר עכו, פרוק הנו שבוית הדאות ומארמון לטבריה. So they release those Jewish girl that was in captivity, that came from South Syria, according to Rashi, or Turkey, anyway, or Armenia. Anyway, they came back from captivity. One of those girls were pregnant from idolater. So they ask how legitimate is child. Again, she was a captive, and they brought her back. They released her, they paid, and they got her back. Unfortunately, the child is illegitimate. הרב ושמואל בבבל, ורבי יהושע בן לוי ובר כפר בארץ ישראל, ואמרי לה חלוף ובר כפר הבא לזקני דרום, ואמרי עובד כוכבים ועבד הבעל ישראל, אבל עד כשר. So you see the other way around. So it means that there are those who said that the child, it is legitimate. So why you follow those who say that it's not valid? אלא אמר רב יוסף רבי. So we follow the הלכה רבי יהודה הנשיא that said that it's illegitimate. דחיית הרב דימי, Rabbi Dimi came from Israel to Babylon. אמר רבי יצחק ברב דומי משום רבינו, אמרו, עובד כוכבים ועבד הבא בעל ישראל, אבל עד ממזר. רבי יהושע בן לוי אומר, הוולד מקולקל, he said that the child is impaired. למען, what do you mean? אילם על הקהל, if you tell me that that's applied to the people, to the congregation, which means he is mamzer, he is illegitimate. אמר רבי יהושע בן לוי, הוולד כשר. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said that the baby is legitimate. Ela likuna. Now it's a different story. Meaning, when it's come to involve with a priesthood, that child, for example, if it's a baby girl, she cannot betrothed to a kohen. Even those who say that the baby is legitimate, that baby girl cannot marry a kohen. So mikal vachomer me'almana. This is something we studied yesterday. Very similar mindset. Ma'almana lekohen gadol shenisura shaveh bakol v'na pagum. The Torah tells us regular kohen cannot marry a divorcee, a regular priest. High priest cannot marry a widow. So if it's a union between the high priest and the widow, the child is not fitting for priesthood anymore. Zoshi isura shaveh bakol. This one that involved with idolater or a slave, that's applied to everyone, no matter if it's a family of Levite or regular family. It's a enodin shebna pagum. How much so that the child is not befitting for priesthood. Ma'alan manal kohen gadol sheken yatzma mitchalelet. The moment she cohabited with a high priest, because her status as almana, as a widow, so automatically she is not befitting for any manner of priesthood. So, for example, if she is the daughter of Kohen, and she used to eat from truma, from consecrated item, the same way here, the moment she cohabited with idolater, that makes her invalid to touch, to eat the consecrated item that designated for the priesthood. The Bach said, Rabbi Ishmael, מניין לעובד כוכבים ועבד הבעלה כהנת ועל הלוויה ועל הישראלית שפסלוה, שנאמר ובת כהן תהיה אלמנה וגרושה. The Torah said clearly in Leviticus 22. מי שיש לו אלמנות וגירושין בה, יצאו עובד כוכבים ועבד של אלמנות וגירושין בה. So here they call it in עברית מחלוקת כמותית. So Rabbi hold in איכות that the baby it's illegitimate. אמר לאביי, מה יחזית לשמחת רב דימי? סמוך דרבין, זה מחלוקת בין רבי יצר, דחיית הרבין, אמר רבי נתן, רבי יהודה הנשיא, מורים בעלי יתרה, אומן רבי יהודה הנשיא, רבי. So even it's his grandson, it's called רבי. ואף רב מודה ביתרה, דהוא עתה לקמא דרב. אמר לו, עובד כוכבים ועבד הבא ישראל. This is frightening story. So just take a deep breath. So, it was a story that fellow came before Rav, the teacher, right? The great teacher. אמר לי, עובד כוכבים הבעל בת ישראל מהו? He says, if idolater cohabited with daughter of Israel, what's the halacha? What's the law? אמר לי, הוולד כשר. So he said, the baby is okay, the baby is legitimate. אמר לי, that person turned that he himself was in that status, and he said, if that's the case, havli bratach, I want to marry your daughter. Everyone understand what's going on? Rude, no? So he said, lo yavin alach. He said to him, no, I'm not going to give you my daughter. אמר שימי ברכיה לרב, אמרי אינשי, גם לה במדי עקה ברקדה. He said, he used a euphemism. He said, people will say, a camel in Madia dances with cow. So, in my book, ורק לומר on Rashi, I brought here Rashi said, יבוא וירקד לפנינו, כלומר, אתה שיתרת דבר חילוש, האמת דבריך ותן לי ביתך. So, the whole concept is, I elaborate here to explain the mashal and nimshal, but it's like, when you use the camel example, it's like language of exaggeration. That what exactly you're expecting here. He says, "Hakaba va'akamla va'amadai v'lo rakda," which means here we have the calf and the camel and the med, yeah, and it's not dancing, which means there are people who does things for money. This is like the Aruch Laner explained. You go to a circus, you see people who endangers their lives to make money or to show how awesome they are. Okay? So he said, in the place called Madai, money means nothing. It was a period of time in history, but money doesn't mean much for people at that time. So he said, in that sense, if you tell me that that's the halacha, meaning the idol worshipper who cohabited with the daughter of Israel, so the baby is legitimate, teach it to public, show it by practicing it. Have your daughter marry me. Alright, so again, they're using a simile, a euphemism with the camel and all of that, just to show an example how he expressed himself to the extreme. Amar lei, in neheve ki Yoshua binun lo yahivna lei brati. He says, even you are like Joshua, this the student of Moses. I'm not going to give you my daughter. Amar lei, ihava ki Yoshua binun imar lo yahiv le'achareni yahiv le. So he said, if I was like Joshua, if you not give me your daughter, somebody else will give me his daughter. Right? So he said, hi, but you, imar lo yavina le, acharenu lo yavina le, So he said, but if you don't give me your daughter, so nobody else, others will not give me. So Rav did not change his mind. This person was a nudnik. He was standing before the Rav and he said, if that's the halacha, I'm not moving anywhere. I want to get your daughter. I want to get the bottom line. This is frightening ending. Again, this is the language of the Talmud. So Rav set his gaze upon the man and he died. You see it in the Torah too. You see it in Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai's story too, that the rabbis, when they get overwhelmed, they did something and the person was no longer among the living. It's a Ben Yoyada and others that ask questions, what exactly happened, why it happened in such a way, what's involved. It's a lot. Reb Chaim Brisk, he brought the Rambam. It's a big Hakira. And anyway, he think that the question was how basically you teach people, how people are going to follow. It wasn't just a personal issue between the two. It's like, it's not just the act of being outrageous or rude to expect to be married to the daughter of the chief rabbi, while the person is idol worshipper, parents, you know, etc., from the lowest of the lowest. But there is a lot, the Ben Yoyada and others, there is a lot to say what exactly involved here. In very general terms, we study in the Tractate Chagiga, page 5, that sometimes the rabbis, when they get overwhelmed, you see it in the Torah even, that when Moses, he hit the Egyptians when there are two people fighting, and the rabbi said that it wasn't physical, he just used one of the secret names of God, and in that sense Moses basically cursed. And we in Judaism believe in the power of our prayers, so the same way as you believe the power of your blessings, there is also power for the other way around. So we should be careful with that. Anyway, ואף רב מתנה מורה בעלי היתרה, ואף רב יהודה מורה בעלי היתרה. וחייתה לקמי דרב יהודה. אמר לי זילי תמר. So the fellow came to him and says, so people don't want to marry me because of that history, right? The parents' history. So he said, go to a place that people don't know you. O nesiv bat minach. Or either you go to exile where your origin is not known, or marry a girl of your own type. So the own type meaning from a family of idol worshippers, former slaves, or something like that. This type of So again, big question is what exactly it meant. It was a question that was asked Stipler, great Rabbi Kanievsky's father, which I have the privilege to know in person many times. We met. They asked him when it's come to shidduchim. We read last week in the Torah, when it's a matchmaking, and people ask you a question about the candidate. They want to know information. Or even when you go, how honest you have to be when you, writing your profile in JDate. Or when you meet a boy or girl, how far you have to be when you speak about yourself or when others ask you about a fellow. So it was a story about a fellow years back that they did a whole process of matchmaking. They about to engage, and the very last moment, the boy, who is a Shiva boy, he went to his potential to be bride, and he said to her, I want you to know something. And he took her to a different room and he said, before we engage, I want you to know that it's prohibited in the Torah to lie. And people tell you a lot of things about me. They say that I'm the best student, and they tell you that I'm the smartest. And I want you to know I'm just average, and whatever they said, it's not true. If you still want to marry me, it's fine, and I like to marry you, but you should know that all these words of praise that people said out, it's incorrect. So this was a very naive girl. She says, if that's the case, I don't want to get married. So so it was, later on, it was a big to-do, and eventually they got married because it turned that he just was a very humble individual. But they asked the Stipler a question, how far a person needs to be honest, what exactly? So, because everyone has his own chesronot, his own pluses and minuses. So he said, if you know that the other party will know that information is totally backed out, the deal, so you have to inform them. If you're not sure, so you don't have to tell them. But in very last point, he said, when they don't ask you, you don't tell. When they ask you, you cannot lie. Right? That's, I saw it in the Sochot of Gemarrah. He brought it from the stapler. Anyway. וכן עתה לקמי דרבה, someone came before Rava, אמר לי או גלי או נסייב בת מנח. You have a choice. Either you go to exile, where your origin is not known, or marry a girl of your own type. The third סוגיה, שלחו בני מחסיה לרבה. It's name of a place. מי שחציו עבד וחציו בן חורין. This Gemara in Gittin 42. In those days they owned slaves, like in America history, right? So there are those who own by two people, meaning one servant that's owned by two. So it can turn that one partner released that person and is a half slave and half free person. So they said, Habal Bat Israel, and he cohabited with the daughter of Israel. Amar le hashta eved kulo amrilan kasher chetziom mivaya. If you tell me someone who's a servant, a slave, it's the child is okay, it's legitimate, so half you have an issue. Amar Rav Yosef Marad Eshmata. Rav Yosef said that the author of the teaching qualified the child of a slave and the Bat Israel. 45b, Manu, who is the one who said that the child is legitimate? Rav Yehuda. והאמר רב יהודה, מי שחציו עבד וחציו בן חורין הבעל בת ישראל, אותו ולד, אין לו תקנה. Wow. So, he said that if someone who is a half slave and half free cohabits with a daughter of Israel, the child of that union has no remedy. In my book, I spent endless hours on this Rashi. So it's a lot. I just give you the abbreviation. Rashi said, Havlad en lo takana bebat Israel klomar mamzeru. So I brought the Rambam. The Rambam said in chapter 15, L'chod Yisrael b'Iyah, he said, Havlad en lo takana, that child, unfortunately, there is no remedy. מפני שצד ממזרות וצד כשרות מעורבים בו. Because it's a mixture. Part is okay, part is not. So the Rambam said, ולפיכך אסור אף בשפחה, he cannot even marry someone the same as him. ובניו כמותו לעולם, so that's applied not just to that person, but for his descendants. That's also the Mechaber said in Even HaEzer, Siman Dalet. But the Beit Shmuel said, he disagreed, and he said that that's applied only by Bat Israel, only to marry a regular one from a regular family. So in short, very short, I brought here the Be'er HaGolah, that he said that it's not so simple, because there are some situations that you make it legitimate. And I brought the Chilkat Mechokek, the much more in details. Those who want to read it are welcome to read it. It's Rabbi Yonatan Eibishitz, Chavodat, and much more. In very short, after a long discussion, I think the meaning of Klomar here, that Rashi tried to tell us that what Rav Yehuda used the term of Vlad en lo takana, that child has no remedy to marry, that it's mamzer, that is legitimate. It means that he used the term klomar mamzer gamur, that is no kemamzer gamur. It's like the Aruch Laner said, that is no remedy for that situation. There are, you see, the rabbis are so smart, they always try to find a way to find a room, but they said in this particular case, it appears that most of them hold that it's no remedy for that situation. Anyway, you're welcome to read more here. כי איתמר דרב יהודה, כגון דקדש בת ישראל, ונמצא צד עבדות שבו משתמש באשת איש. For example, that this fellow, the half slave and half a free man, betroth a regular Jewish girl and then cohabited with her, and then part of that enslavement part of his cohabits with a married woman. That's so because the kiddushin is effective with a free man but ineffective with a slave. So you see here that the woman is the wife of a man's free half, but a married woman, vice versa, he is enslavement half. So the child of that union will therefore be a mamzer, illegitimate. And Tosfot elaborates on that. We do not have the time. והאמרי נהרדה משמד רבי יעקב לדברי הפוסל פוסל אפילו בפנויה. The one who disqualified the child of that union, it's even the case of unmarried woman. לדברי המכשיר, מכשיר אפילו באשת איש, which means that's רב יהודה. ושניהם לא למדוע אלא מאשת אב. מאשת אב, so that's something that we're going to study on page 49, that because the Torah said in the Deuteronomy 23, a person should not take the wife of his father, and then the Torah said in attachment, a mamzer, the illegitimate person should not enter the congregation of God, so therefore because of the attachment it's connected to each other. Man defasil savar, one who disqualified the child's hold. Ma eshetav de lo tafsei bekiddushin. So we know that the idol worshipper and a slave, you don't have tfisat kiddushin. Again, for those who come late, tfisat kiddushin meaning even by force of circumstance after the fact. If it's an act of betrothed, it doesn't have the legitimacy by Jewish law, meaning there are some cases that after the fact we state that it's okay. But in this one, for example, idolaters, idol worshippers, and the slave, that act of betrothed has no any form of legitimacy, which means even after the fact. And therefore, הבלת ממזר, אף כל לא תפסה בקידושין, הבלת ממזר. ומה דמכשיר סבר, מה יש לבלת לא תפסה בקידושין, להכרין את תפסה בקידושין, which means for others. להפוק כעובד כוכבים ועבד לא תפסה בקידושין כלל. So even a slave that cohabited with a married woman, it's according to that view, it's not, the child is not considered ממזר. אלא כי יתמר דרב יהודה, כגון שבעל אשת איש, ונמצא צד שכירות שבו משתמש בעת אשת איש. So here we speak about situation that someone who cohabited with a married woman, which means that half a slave and half free man cohabited with the wife of another man, so that his free part is found to have cohabited with a married woman. So that's the point. It's like half and a half. So the chidush is that you have tzad cherut, where she said that part of that it's a free, and that part created a new situation for the baby. So that baby is now legitimate because half of him is free. So as we said earlier from Gemarrah and Gittin, if you have a two slave owner, one person, and one slave owner release his slave, and that person is a half a slave, a half a not. So in that sense, the act of cohabitation created a new atmosphere for the baby, and since half of him is legitimate, therefore that paved the way, according to that view, to legitimize that child. Anyway, אמר רבינה, אמר לי רב גזה, איקלה רבי יוסי ברבין להטרין. So he said that he came, Rabbi Yossi Baravin, who issued the ruling, he entered to visited my place, והווה עובדה בפנויה, that was a case of a incident with unmarried woman who cohabited with a slave, ועכשיו, and Rabbi Yehuda said that the baby is legitimate. So they said be'eshet ish. However, that incident happened with a married woman, upasil, and he declared that the child is unfit. So it means that according to Rav Gaza, disputed of the sages of Nahardea, and he hold that whoever said that the slave cohabited with the Bat Israel is also allowed the married one. Amar Rav Shesh Ledidi, Amar Lik Rav Gaza, he himself told me, not the view of Ravina, לא כרבי יוסי ברבין אבא, אלא כרבי יוסי ברזביד אבא. והכשר בין בפנויה בין באשת איש. And he declared that the child feed both in the case of unmarried woman and in the case of married woman. אמר להטרין, והכשר בין בפנויה בין באשת איש. Now the final halacha for Gilbert והלכתה, that's the halacha. עובד כוכבים ועבד על בת ישראל עבלת כשר בין פנויה בין באשת איש. What is it? An idolater or slave cohabits with a Jewess, the offspring is fit both in the case of unmarried woman and in the case of married woman. Regardless, by the way, according to the Rambam, Hilchot Yisrael Biyat chapter 15, if it was a rape or she agreed to that cohabitation. Now, as far as the connection to priesthood, that's a different story. That's a big rabbinic opposition. Anyway, Rava Achshire le Rav Meri Barachel. That's a well-known name in the Talmud, that using the mother's name, this name of a rabbi, and using not the father's name. Usually they have the name of those rabbis, they have the father. Here they have the mother. According to Rashi in Bava Metzia 73, it's because she was a captive and she was raped by one of the idolaters, capture, and that's the reason why that child. In honor of him, they don't mention. They mention just the mother. Anyway, Umanyei befusei devavel, and also they appointed him among the officers in Babylon, which means they make him like one of the machers. Tosfot here also. So that the taxes people. Anyway, ואף על גב דמר מר שום תשים עליך מלך, כל משימות שאתה משים על יהיו אלא מקרב אחיך. The Torah said in Deuteronomy 17, when you appointed a king, should be among your brethren. So they said, Hi, כיוון דאמו מישראל מקרב אחיך קרינו. As we know, we said it many times, we go by the mother. So the idea is, and that's also the Rambam in the Hilchot Melachim said, chapter 1, that needs to have the mother Jewish. So the Netivot, it's a famous story of Netivot that he asked that question: what happened with the idolater that came and they have asked of that union, they have a child. So he asked the Chazon Ish. So he thought that to do lechumra, and the Chazon Ish said no, that is fine. Anyway, Tosfot here asked a question about Agrippas. The story of the Agrippas. Tosfot said, just give you the one point. He says, שאמרו לו אחינו אתה, וכאמר בגמרא אותה שעה נתחבו סמם של ישראל כליה. So they called the king Agrippas as a brother. And so basically he wasn't Bat Israel. So anyway, לפי שהייתה אמו מישראל, according to Rashi. So much to discuss on this Tosfot. Now we go to a new sugya, the whole idea of geirim. עבדי דרבי חייא ברבי רב עמי עד בלילה היו עובדת כוכבים לשם אינטתה. So there's a two pshatim, two explanation in Rashi. One Rashi rejected, but in general it's a fellow that live with a non-Jew and he asked her to go to the mikveh, right? For the purpose of purification, l'shem nida. So the question is, how you treated that? So basically, their purpose of ducking in a mikveh. It's when she finished the process of learning, for example. So the very final stage is the ducking in the mikveh. They have a mikveh lady, she watch her, etc., etc., and the rabbis in a different location, they just need to hear from the mikveh lady that she's fine, etc., etc. So you see here a different goal. It wasn't the goal for conversion. The goal is a regular, like we have, regular time after they finishing the period, they're counting the days, and then she duck herself in the mikveh. So Rav Yosef hold here, Yachlune, he used the language, which is a very interesting language. He said here, I'm able to find legal grounds to declare both her and her daughter fit. So Tosfot here tells a lot of point. Very interesting Tosfot. Tosfot said here, the last one. The ger tzarich shlosha de mishpat ktiv bei. Regular case of conversion, you have two entities. One is the bet din. You need to have 3 rabbis in the bet din in order to accept that part, which is called Kabbalat Ol Mitzvot, which is the key point. She accepted upon herself, or he, the burden, the yoke of the life of Torah and Mitzvot. And therefore, the way that he explained, and just give you the abbreviation of Tosfot here, I highly recommend it to those who have time to read Tosfot here. He said that in that essence, just to duck in a mikveh, you don't need a bed din. Duck in mikveh, duck in mikveh. But at the very end, he said something that, again, we don't have the time, but it said at the end, v'had de'ein matbilin haynu lechatchila mid'Rabbanan. For sure, it's a lot to discuss this ending of the Tosfot. But here Rav Yosef elaborates, and he tells us, Ba'ke de Rav Asi, d'amar Rav Asi, mi lo tavla leniduta. Usually the non-Jewish ladies do not go to the mikveh to purify themselves. That's the way Yerushalmi also said. So you meant to say, to tell me that because she acted in that manner, so therefore that also make her Jewish? He said, Bivrata uvet kochavim ve'eved l'bayit Yisrael avlad kasher. So here, as we said, the whole issue here with the Tosfot is, if she's not accepted upon herself the Kabbalat Ol Mitzvot, acceptance of the Torah and Mitzvot, so Tosfot tried to say that b'diavad it's appear that it's okay, but for sure the way that the end of the Tosfot said that it's not fitting Giyur, that it's not something that the Chumrah for sure not, that some rabbis or even many rabbis will not accept that conversion. That is a fellow that they have like a nickname, and they call him the son of Aramit. Why? Because they say that his mother did not duck herself when she finished her conversion. Amar Rav Asi, mi lo tavla leniduta. You mean to say, in Judaism, the kavanah, the intent, is crucial. So the question here, what exactly the purpose of that tvila of the mother? He said, did the woman not immerse herself for purification from her nida state? So nida state, since she conducted herself as Jewish, she surely immersed herself in a mikveh each time her nida period ended, to permit her to cohabit with her husband. That immersion qualifies as an immersion for conversion, being that it is a Jewish practice. That's the way Rashi tells us. So they said, Ahu the Havule Kavule Bararama, So here it's a different story. They call him the son of Aramean, but Aramean meaning father, Aramean man, which it's a euphemism to someone who's idolater, meaning someone who's son of idolater. Why? So the idea is, Tosfot Chad Mekamai said that his father was converted and circumcised and accepted himself the life of Torah, but he didn't duck himself in the mikveh. And Begeirut, when it's come to final stage of conversion, the rabbis hold that Tvila Me'akev, which means if the person did not duck himself in the mikveh, is not completed the process of Geirut. So therefore some people consider that man as a son of Aramean man. But again, the big thing is, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Milo Tavar Lekiryo. We explained that this is something that Ezra, the famous scribe, decreed that one who experienced a Baal Keri, a seminal emission, so he's forbidden to study Torah or pray until he immerses himself. That's Gemarrah in Bava Kama, page 82. Since the father believed himself to be Jewish, he presumably adhered to this decree. And since the immersion is Jewish practice, it qualifies as an immersion for conversion, as we said. So here you see here the Yeshut and Yitzchak Chelek Aleph elaborates on that. The Aruch LaNer also said that if the mother is Jewish, you don't have to bother with all of that. And if she's not, what's the difference if the father duck himself? So then he said that all these sugya basically speak not about the father, but about the son. And since you talk here about the son, so the whole perception of this, it's a different story. Why basically they call him Bar Rama.
Boyachem leshuloim malachai yeshuloim malachai